You're watching BBC News at 9 with me, Anita McVeigh. The headlines. Shamima Begum, one of 3 schoolgirls who left London in 2015 to join the so-called Islamic State group, says she wants to return to the UK so her unborn baby can be looked after.
Scared that this baby's going to get sick in this camp. That's why I really want to get back to Britain, because I know it will be taken care of.
Who have been out there against the advice of the Foreign Office to go and engaged in support or activities of terrorism, you should be prepared to be, if you come back, prepared to be questioned, investigated and potentially prosecuted.
The Prime Minister faces another rebellion on Brexit in Parliament as MPs debate the next steps in the process. The European plane manufacturer Airbus says it's going to stop producing the A380 Super Jumbo, the world's largest passenger airliner. Reducing the risk of heart attacks and strokes, the NHS is launching a new scheme to get more people to have their blood pressure and cholesterol levels checked. After 15 years on Mars, NASA calls time on the Opportunity rover, crediting the robot as having transformed its understanding of the red planet. And in sport, Spurs take a big step towards the Champions League quarter-finals after a 3-0 win over Borussia Dortmund. Hello, a very good morning to you and welcome to the BBC News at 9. A London schoolgirl who left Britain as a 15-year-old to join the so-called Islamic State group says she wants to come home. Speaking to The Times, Shamima Begum, who's now 19, married to an Islamic State fighter and 9 months pregnant, says she wants to give birth in the UK. This morning, the Security Minister Ben Wallace told the BBC that anyone who joined IS must understand that actions have consequences. Chichi Izundu reports.
Pictured for the first time in almost 4 years in a camp in northern Syria, Shamima Begum, one of the 3 schoolgirls from Bethnal Green who left to join the Islamic State group, which by then already had a murderous reputation. Just 15 when they went, she told The Times about their arrival in IS territory.
We crossed the borders, they realised who we were, that we were the 3 girls, and they took us to a house, a man's house with his wife, and they didn't tell us why we were there. And then afterwards we found out that it was because they suspected we were spies. I was there for only 3 weeks, so after that I got married.
She told The Times reporter Anthony Lloyd that her friend Khadija Sultana was killed in an airstrike, but she said the 3rd Bethnal Green girl, Amira Abbasi, was still alive 2 weeks ago. And Shamima Begum doesn't accept they made a mistake in joining the Islamic State group.
Did you ever see executions?
No, but I saw a beheaded head in the bin.
What was that like when you first saw that? These are the heads of captives?
Yeah, didn't faze me at all.
But she does say while she was with IS, she lost 2 children through malnutrition and sickness. She's now 9 months pregnant with a 3rd child and is desperate to get back to the UK.
I'm scared that this baby's going to get sick in this camp. That's why I really want to get back to Britain, because I know it will be taken care of.
The Home Office says anyone taking part in conflict in Syria or Iraq must expect to be investigated by police to determine whether they've committed criminal offences and to ensure that they do not pose a threat to national security. Chichi Zindu, BBC News.
And let's talk now to our correspondent John Donnison. John, how easy or complicated would it be for Shamima Begum to return to the UK?
I think it's going to be pretty difficult. We heard in Chichi's piece there, she's 9 months pregnant, due to give birth any day now, according to her. The Security Minister, Ben Wallace, has told the BBC this morning that she will not be offered any sort of consular assistance to return home. He said he was not prepared to send over British officials to risk their lives in what is clearly a very dangerous part of the world, and that she would then have to make her own way to a British consulate, possibly in Turkey or Lebanon. That seems quite unlikely, and that she could, in fact, the Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has said she could be stopped from boarding a plane if they thought she posed a threat to the UK. So I think it's going to be pretty tricky.
And the Times reporter Anthony Lloyd calls her an indoctrinated ISIS bride, but in this interview she doesn't do herself any favours, does she? Because she doesn't express any regrets about what she's done.
She doesn't express any regret, and it was interesting listening to Anthony Lloyd, because he said, you know, when she left the UK, she was 15 years old. She was young, and there was an argument that she had been indoctrinated and sort of groomed into ISIS. This is 4 years on now, and I was listening to former senior figures within the police this morning saying similar things. The situation is very different now from 4 years ago when she left. Then the police did come out, senior figures within the police said, look, she would be treated as a victim. That's not the case now.
John, has there been any reaction from her family or anyone acting on behalf of her family?
Not from the family itself in Bethnal Green in East London, but from a solicitor representing the family, Tasneen Akunji. He said he was glad that she was still alive, and he actually pointed out those comments made 4 years ago by the police that she should be treated as a victim. I think the government will have a very different view.
OK, John, thank you for that. John Donnison. Well, a little bit more now on what Ben Wallace, the Security Minister, had to say on the Today programme about the government's message to those who want to return home.
If you have been out there against the advice of the Foreign Office to go and engaged in support or activities of terrorism, you should be prepared to be, if you come back, prepared to be questioned, investigated and potentially prosecuted for committing terrorist offences.
Now, she's currently in a Syrian refugee camp. As you made very clear yesterday when you were on The World at One, there are no British officials, there are no diplomats who are in Syria at the moment. Is your view that until and unless she can find a British official, she can say what she likes, she's not coming out?
Well, we just don't provide consular services in Syria. You know, it's dangerous. I don't want to send British civil servants and officials out into a, you know, still active civil war in effectively parts of a failed state. That is why we don't provide that.
So she's got to find her way somewhere else where there is British consular support if she's to have any chance of prosecuting her claim to come
Well,
out.
I can't really comment on her individual case for potential legal reasons. I think the issue is anyone in that situation would have to make their way to a place where there is consular services if they were trying to get back to the United Kingdom, or indeed seek for the UK to give them either some sort of support or whatever. That's just the rule across the country, the world, I think.
Security Minister Ben Wallace. Meanwhile, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, gave his reaction to Shamima Begum's desire to return to the UK.
I don't want to prejudice any potential case that may occur, but I'm quite clear we have laws in place that make sure that the police and the authorities can speak to somebody before they get on a plane to see any offences have been committed. And if we think that anybody who comes to our country is a national security threat or may commit a criminal offence, they can be stopped from coming to our country. If it's the case that anybody arrives in this country, they can be interviewed at port to see whether any offences have been committed. It's really important that the police and the authorities look at any individual case very seriously. But the wider point I'd make is we also know, and I've talked about this in the past, that there are children and vulnerable people being groomed, being radicalised in their bedrooms in this country. And so I'd say to any parent, any big brother, any big sister, anybody who thinks somebody that they know may be being groomed, please ring the authorities. There's a number you can ring, 0800 789 321, the counter-terror hotline. You can ring anonymously and help us make sure we can keep all of us safe, but also avoid any young person, any child or vulnerable person being groomed, being radicalised by Islamist extremists.
The Mayor of London. Well, I'm joined now by Gina Vale, a research fellow at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London. Gina, thank you very much for coming along. I'm trying to recall if there's any precedent for a situation like this here in the UK, someone who's gone to join IS as a IS bride and wanting to come back to the UK.
We only have one case of that, and that individual was actually detained upon arrival. She had one child, and at the moment it's understood that that child is within Child Protective Services.
As we've heard, it does sound, though, as though the situation 4 years on from when Shamima Begum went to join IS. The situation for her now is very different than if she had perhaps sought to come back to the UK sooner.
This is what makes her case quite unique. So she travelled as a minor. She was 15. Her friends at the time were also 15 and 16. She has now since become an adult during her time within Islamic State. But she has stated very clearly that she has still got an allegiance to the group, even though some aspects of living under Islamic State rule were not quite to her liking. She still shows that she is ideologically committed to their cause. And this is actually quite unusual for women. We've seen news reports recently where women have said that they were lured or groomed to be taken to Islamic State territory, often by a male relative. And so she's actually taking account of her own voluntary decision to join that group.
And saying that the only reason she wants to come back is so that her unborn child can avail of NHS care. How difficult do you think it would be to even begin to think about de-radicalising someone who talks in that way?
Well, first we need to look at demobilisation. So we've seen that she has expressed interest in conducting violence for the group. The fact that she says that she was not fazed by seeing severed heads whilst she was in Islamic State territory shows that she has an affinity to violence committed by the group. So the first stage is to try and take her away from a violent cause within the ideology, and then to look at possibilities for rehabilitation and de-radicalisation.
But as things stand, the authorities would presumably judge that someone who is saying this represents a danger to the UK.
It's difficult to try and ascertain a security threat of her as an individual. There is no evidence as of yet to say that she has engaged in any violence, even though she has remained within Islamic State's strongholds for a long period of time. There is no evidence to suggest that she has actually participated in violence herself. And this may be on account of the fact that she is a woman. Islamic State only allowed women to take up arms at the end of 2017. We saw evidence of this in January 2018, but we've yet to see any individuals actually
But the government clearly has to take account of an influence that someone might have that might attack British values and way of life.
We also need to consider the long-term effects of refusing to repatriate civilians such as Shamima Begum or others, particularly when there are infants involved. Those infants are innocent. They were born into this situation through their parents' volition and choice to be there. And if we consider the long-term consequences of not repatriating civilians such as herself and others, we then risk increasing the strain and burden on already overstretched facilities within Iraq and Syria.
How much do you think the government considers the court of public opinion in this, if you like? Because clearly, if you look at public opinion at the moment, people are saying, you know, she's made her bed, she has to lie in it.
It's definitely a political issue and it's something of public interest, but that cannot be seen to influence policy, particularly with regard to her infant. If that infant is born inside Iraq or Syria in this case, then that infant has a right to British nationality, and it is in our best interest to ensure that that child has those rights.
You talk about strain on services abroad, but presumably if Shamima Begum was brought back, whatever would subsequently happen to her, whatever would happen to her child, there would be considerable cost involved there as well.
Yes, but this is cost that we need to reinvest in order to ensure that in the long term a security threat is reduced. If we do not repatriate civilians such as Shamima or others, there is a chance that authorities inside Iraq and Syria will start to release prisoners, either that or take matters into their own hands judicially, and so we cannot account for their own human rights within the conflict zone.
So what would be the tests for deciding whether someone should be repatriated or not?
Everyone has a right to repatriation. They did not renounce their citizenship as such in a legal capacity. Ideologically, they felt that they joined an Islamic State, but there is no legal acknowledgement for the fact that they have adopted a new citizenship.
It's a tricky line then, isn't it, to judge?
Exactly.
OK, Gina, thank you very much for your time today talking about this case.
Thank you.
And we'll have much more, of course, on that story for you throughout the day.